Revelation chapter 13 this morning as we conclude our series, The End of the World. Revelation chapter 13. We're going to talk about the Antichrist this morning and see who the Antichrist is. Do you know who the Antichrist is? Could you imagine and could you recognize him if he were on TV this afternoon? Could you say, that's the Antichrist? You know, down through the years, prognosticators have claimed that certain people were the Antichrist. The Pope, he must be the Antichrist. Gorbachev, when I was a kid, I remember people saying Gorbachev must be Antichrist. I mean, he's already got the thing on his forehead covering up the 666. Honestly, that's what people used to say, the birthmark. Others say it's got to be the President of the United States from Ronald Reagan forward. They said he is the Antichrist. And so the Bible, though, gives us a very clear picture of this ruler. And it issues him certain names. Daniel calls him the Prince that shall come, the King of fierce countenance, the little horn. Paul calls him the man of sin, the son of perdition, the wicked one. John calls him the beast, the Antichrist. And so we've come to call him the Antichrist. John is given a clear vision of who this Antichrist is and what he's about at the end times as God shows him how things will occur in the future. The Antichrist will rule the world. He will make peace with Israel. I mean, isn't that what all of the Arab nations want? No, not really. But that's what he'll do. He'll come in and say there will be peace with Israel. He will control everything and will make all people follow and worship him. Here's what Antichrist means, and you ought to write this down. It's really, really easy. It simply means opposition to Christ. Opposition to Christ. Totally opposite of what Christ would do. So you see somebody doing the opposite of what Christ would do, you would call their action Antichrist. And so we will call this person Antichrist. That fits right in with our culture today, which is very Antichrist. Abortion, gay rights, murder, terrorism are all Antichrist. They're all opposed to what Christ would do. And so that's the defining personality of this coming world ruler. Don't be deceived. He will not come onto the scene and say, hello, my name is Antichrist. It's not going to be that easy. In the midst of economic catastrophe and political chaos and spiritual absence and climactic disasters, as we saw last week in the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist will come with deception and dishonesty and big promises of peace into this world that's rocked with pandemonium by the Great Tribulation. Now, remember, Christians won't be here to see the Antichrist. But we need to understand who he is and what he's about, because our society will quickly embrace this person and follow him. So I want us to look at some characteristics of this beast that John calls him. So his appearance will be very clear. First of all, I want you to see his portrait. His portrait, the portrait of the Antichrist. What is his portrait? What does he look like? What is he shown to be? Look in chapter 13 of Revelation, verse number 1. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, and having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. John saw something he could only describe as a beast. As a beast. Now what is a beast? Well, his words could never explain the vision to us. A beast is something that is evil. A beast is something that is larger than life. A beast is a killer. And so John said, I saw this beast. Notice, he has blasphemous names. It says on his heads were blasphemous names. The Roman emperors back in Paul and John's day tended to use titles of deity when they reigned. For example, Domitian, the emperor, wanted to be called and forced people to call him Lord and God. And so this creature, John says, was rising out of the sea. And you say, well, that's not important, but it is very important, because in the Bible, the sea depicts the Gentile nations, those who are not Jewish. And so the Antichrist will not be a Jew. Revelation 17, verse 15, Daniel chapter 9, verse 20 show us that Jerusalem is destroyed by this Antichrist. And no Jew would ever destroy the holy city of Jerusalem. So the Antichrist is a Gentile. He's from the mass of humanity. He is a counterfeit Christ. He is representative of the empire and himself as its ruler. There's something strange about this beast that John tells us. He has 7 heads. 7 heads and 10 horns. If some animal walked up to you in your backyard with 7 heads, what would you do? After you got up off the ground, you would try to figure out and call somebody, there's an animal in my backyard with 7 heads. And so, it's a strange description from John. Is it literal? Is it literal? Have you ever seen anything with 7 heads? Which leads us to the second characteristic that shows us his power. His power. John says in verse number 1, again the last part, he had 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. And John says the beast, look how he describes him in verse 2. He was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear. His mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power and throne and great authority. So what are these heads and horns and all this stuff? What's all this got to do with this guy? Well, 7 heads stands for 7 probably rulers or kings in successive reign. He is the head over all of them. He is representing them as their sovereign. John saw the Antichrist, I believe, as ruling over 7 different leaders. So why did he have 10 horns? Or what are horns? Horns are symbolic of authority. Authority. We'll see in just a few minutes to somebody else that has horns. A 10-nation confederation that submits to his authority. He had 10 horns. If 10 nations, why only 7 leaders? Well, not saying that she is the Antichrist. Please don't misquote me. But Queen Elizabeth II is the queen over lots of nations. Not Israel. Ireland. She might like to be over Israel. Ireland, England, Scotland, Australia, Canada. You know how she's ruled all over those. So she is the ruler of more than just one nation. So that could happen as well. So some say a revival, these 10 nations must be a revival of the Roman Empire. This has got to be the Roman Empire. Originally that empire had 10 nations that joined forces to come to be called the Roman Empire. Let me give you some theories, only theories, that some people espouse about nations comprising this 10-nation federation. Some people say it's the European Union. The European Union. It is united in currency, united in judicial law, with a legislative body called the European Council. They are policy groups, schools, banks, all tied into the European Union. To join this union, a nation has to transfer some of their sovereignty to the Council. There are 28 nations, none of whom are military powerhouses except for the United Kingdom. They are united under a series of treaties, and this union is comprised of 736 parliament members representing 500 million citizens. Could be the European Union, some say. Others say no, it's got to be the United Nations, the UN. Established in 1945 after World War II, the UN has 150 nations participating together with, this blew my mind as I was reading this, 40,000 employees to promote peace. Their annual budget, $4 billion. They're governed by a Secretary General who's elected from the General Assembly. A major group in making policy is the United Nations Security Council, which consists of 15 countries, 5 of which are permanent, 10 are rotating. Their decisions are deemed final, and all nations have to submit to their authority. Some people say, well, it could be NATO. NATO. 28 member countries joined together to provide defense in case of another attack after World War II. They have policy in Parliament and all those things. Some people say, no, it's none of those. It's the Club of Rome. You ever heard of them? The Club of Rome. It's based out of Switzerland. Their organization calls for the earth to be broken into 10 different regions, with a leader assigned to govern those specific regions. They claim to be independent of any political, ideological, or religious interest. There are 160 members in this club. One of the members is Mikhail Gorbachev. They propose a global perspective with awareness of increasing the interdependence of nations. One world rule. Maybe it's the Russian Federation, maybe it's the Chinese Empire. We don't know who these 10 nations are. But we know that John says the Antichrist has 10 crowns and 10 horns, meaning he rules over those nations. His authority is described in verse 2. He says he looked like a leopard. What is a leopard? It's a signification of swiftness. His bear, he says, is like a bear. He has strength. He's like a lion. He has majesty and power. Those are the exact same characteristics that Daniel gives in chapter 7 of his book of beasts. So where does this Antichrist, get all of his power? Well, verse 1 says the dragon, Satan, gives the Antichrist his power. What kind of power does he have? It's an international power, verse 1 says. An international power. Verse 2 says it's a supernatural power. It's from Satan. He's got authority. It's verse 5, look down what it says. It's temporary. He was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. He's temporary. He's temporary. It's military power, verse 7. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, and that's signifying every tongue and every nation. It's military. But it's also financial. Look over at verse 16. It's financial. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand, on their foreheads. No one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. It's financial. He's got a lot of power, no question. And just as the world is tossed into chaos by the rapture, the church is snatched away, the church into heaven, he steps on to lead with multiple promises. And so I want us to see, thirdly, his plan. Number 3 is his plan. Back in chapter 13, verse 3, John says this, "And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. And his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?'" One of his heads, for some strange reason, John notices, one of his heads, one of the empires, looked to be mortally wounded, but it was healed. One of the empires that he represented was healed. Scholars tell us this symbolizes an empire that used to rule with authority but had been defeated, and now it's back in authority. It shows a revival of a former powerhouse. That could be a host of empires if you know anything about history. It could be Chinese, Babylonian, Persian, which is Iranian. It could be British, it could be American. We don't know who this authority is, but it has rule and power. So his goal is none other than world domination, verse 3. And every nation under his reign is his goal. Every small island nation, every major nation, that is his goal. He will do what Napoleon and Alexander the Great and Stalin and Hitler all failed at doing. He will rule the world, the entire world. Verse 4 says they worshipped the dragon. Who is that? That's Satan. They worshiped Satan. And not only that, they worshiped the beast. They worshiped the dragon. As we saw last week, John calls Satan the dragon. They worship the dragon and the beast, Satan and the Antichrist. Worship, note very clearly there in verse number 4, they followed him. They marveled. They followed him. It's a religious term. They deemed him as a god, as the leader. We've seen that down through history as well. Alexander the Great and Hitler. People thought they were gods. They thought they could rule, and so they gave everything they had to his authority. So that's his plan. Number 4, I want you to see his pride. His pride. Look in verse number 5. He was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Arrogance is a good word to describe this leader. Arrogant. He will boast of his power and blaspheme. His mouth will speak, the Bible says, of great things. Why would he speak of great things? Promises. Promises to this world that's devastated by this great tribulation like we saw last week. He will bring initiatives about peace. He will restore hope and money to finance the rebuilding of one world economy. The issue is pride was the same characteristic of Satan, which caused him to be kicked out of heaven. He apparently passes this on to his minion, the beast. But we see next that he won't have long to make good on those arrogant promises. Number 5 is his period. Look at verse 5 again. His period is 42 months. 42 months. He'll be a popular world ruler. He gains authority. It'll last 42 months. What is that? 3.5 years. Half of the 7 years of the tribulation. Note that he was given authority. He was given authority, verse 5 says. I fully believe that God himself gives this Antichrist his authority. God himself does. It says for 3.5 years, you will be part of my judgment upon the earth. But he also is submissive to Satan. Satan uses him as a subordinate. Something that Satan couldn't possibly do, the Antichrist does. Now, he's not here very long, but we know that many politicians can do a lot of damage in 3.5 years. And that's what he does. Number 6 is his perversion. His perversion in verse 6. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. One of his highest qualities that he loves about himself is blasphemy. He wants to blaspheme the name of God. Blaspheme in a theological sense means the crime of assuming to oneself the rights, the qualities of God. I pretend to be God. Now, we have a lot of people in the world who think they're God. And so that's what a blasphemy is in a theological sense. But in a modern definition, we use it this way. It's irreverent behavior toward anything that's sacred. Irreverent behavior toward anything that's held sacred. So what does he blaspheme? Verse 6 tells us very clearly, he blasphemes God. He blasphemes God's name. He blasphemes God's tabernacle. He blasphemes God's saints. That's you and me in heaven. He blasphemes all of those. As never before, a human leader will before the entire world, with his mouth and with his actions, blaspheme everything near and dear to God. Look in 2 Thessalonians with me. I want to show you something. Just back a few pages. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul is writing about this very thing, and we need to see this. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Paul says this, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. And the man of sin, the Antichrist, is revealed, the son of perdition. Who is this guy? Verse 4. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. You see how that goes right along with what John saw? Verse 5. Do you not remember that when I was still with you I told you these things? And now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. God is restraining. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. The lawless one is coming. What's he going to do? He will deceptively sit in the Jewish temple and claim to be God. I'm God. You will worship me, or you will not eat, or you will not have any money. Daniel and Jesus both spoke of this main thing that's about to happen here. It's called the abomination of desolation. The Antichrist is going to get in the temple, the Jewish temple, and he's going to claim to be God. You say, well, wait a minute, Pastor, there's not a Jewish temple anymore. And you're right. The Muslim Dome of the Rock is there in its place. You've seen that on TV in the middle of Jerusalem with the big gold dome. It's where the temple sits. But let me tell you this. There's an organization called the Temple Institute. The Temple Institute has every single item in place to rebuild that temple. You can go on their website and you can see everything they've got. From a red heifer that they're raising to sacrifice, to all these little lambs that they're prepared to sacrifice. They have prepared everything that they need to rebuild that temple. As a matter of fact, they have just constructed the altar of sacrifice to renew the sacrificial system. Everything's in place for the Antichrist to step in and say, I am God. The Antichrist will pervert the temple, and he will cause unheard of war against Israel as God brings his judgment upon the Jewish people. Not only that, his perversion, but number 7 is his persecution. His persecution. Look back in chapter 13, verse 7. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Remember last week we saw, or 2 weeks ago we saw the rapture. The saints are going to be gone. Well, why does this say he's going to make war against the saints? If they're already in heaven, he can't do anything to me. Well, apparently, as we saw last week, there's going to be some people who are saved during the Great Tribulation. And so he's going to make war against them. They'll be the target of the Antichrist. His persecution says, here in verse 7, will reach every single people group on the planet. Hitler's ovens, Stalin's camps, Saddam Hussein's gas will look like child's play when this guy gets through. Right now in the world, more Christians are dying than ever before simply because they're a follower of Christ. More than 43 million Christians have been killed for their faith since the crucifixion of Christ. 43 million. That's just what we have a record of. It's been estimated that more Christians were martyred in the 20th century than all the prior 1900 centuries combined. There were more than 26 million documented cases of martyrdom in the 20th century alone. That's 150 to 165,000 every single year. Why? Because they stand up and say, I am a follower of Christ. And they're beheaded, they're tortured, they're killed, whatever's done to them. We don't hear much about that on NBC, ABC, CBS, do we? But it's happening. And here it's just going to pick up the pace. Antichrist will no doubt double his efforts to eradicate any sign of Christianity on the globe. I can imagine the church facilities that are left behind will be destroyed. People who accept Christ will be tortured and slaughtered because of what they believe in Jesus. As a matter of fact, Daniel, thousands of years ago, told us this. Let me read this little excerpt from Daniel chapter 11, verse 36. Daniel says this, Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. He's talking about the Antichrist. He shall speak blasphemies against the God of all gods. He shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard of any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. Annihilation. He shall also enter the glorious land, that's the Holy Land, that's Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him.
Looking for a great eating experience? Then you need to come over to Twister's. Twister's is a locally owned diner that simply has it all. From salads to burgers, blue plate specials, and a terrific kids menu, Twister's is sure to please any member of your family. Twister's also has the best ice cream you'll find. From a simple cone to specialty sundaes, Mayfield soft serve is a treat anytime. Dine in or just drive through. Twister's is an experience you don't want to miss, whether you're looking for a great meal or just to satisfy that sweet tooth. Twister's Diner, just a good place.